Chapter 2, Divine Timing. Narrated by Shandora Warren. Music by Epidemic Sound. That's how it was with my dad. Any small statement or question could lead to a lengthy explanation. The only thing he didn't explain was why he left. My parents' relationship wasn't perfect, but it seemed fairly solid. After all, they were together for a very long time. They raised my older sisters, put them through college, and watched them get married. But everything went to dust when I was 11 and nobody told me anything. My father was there one day and suddenly gone the next. After all the lengthy life lessons, that was the one thing that he didn't care to explain. My mother told me that he moved away. When I asked why, she said, because he did, and that was that. But it wasn't just that for me. He was my father. I was 11 years old and I didn't know any life other than the one we lived together. I loved both of my parents, but I was certainly closer to my father. My mother was a nurturer. She cooked, cleaned, and mothered me. She hugged me and told me that things would be okay. But it was different with my father. My father sat me down and talked to me. He taught me life lessons. He took me fishing. When I thought about my life projection, I couldn't imagine any part that didn't include my father. So I decided to take a stand. I told my mother that I wanted to live with him. And being the standoffish person that she often was, she simply said, no, with no further explanation. I can't explain how angry I became after that. At a certain point, I realized how misplaced that was, and I regretted it on so many occasions. My mother tried to create a sense of normalcy after my father left. It was just us, but we didn't struggle financially. My mother worked, and my father paid child support. The crazy thing is, everything was strategically arranged to protect me. I just didn't know it. My father always visited me at the house. Prior to his arrival, my mother gave me the same speech. She'd tell me that she was leaving so I could spend some time alone with my father. She'd say, no, you can't leave with them, so don't ask. She'd leave, and my father would arrive shortly thereafter. Breaking the code, I'd always ask my father if I could live with him. His answer was the same. I wish you could, buddy, but it's not that easy. My father's answer never did anything to pacify me. In fact, it was the exact opposite. It seemed to validate the story that I had created in my mind. My father wanted me to live with him, but my mother was the reason why I couldn't. And every time it happened, I became more and more resentful towards her. As a person who was once placed in a position of leadership, I have an understanding about something. Sometimes things have to remain unsaid. That's not a disciplinary thing. It's protection. My mother was truly a saint. And in spite of what I believed at the time, she was protecting me in every way. There were so many parts to the equation, and I had no idea. In my mind, she was the enemy. I wanted to live with my father, and my mother was making that impossible. That's what I thought. But the truth came in two separate parts. My mother knew it would hurt me to my core if I discovered either of those truths, so she tried to protect me from them. That didn't last very long. I turned 12 a few months after my father left. If I could explain it in any way, I'd say that my birthday arrived with fire and fury. I was bothered by my father leaving. That was amplified by the feeling that my mother was keeping me away from him, so I started to rebel. My father wasn't there to reel me in, and my mother couldn't handle me. I did whatever I wanted, and whatever I didn't want to do, I didn't do it. If I didn't want to go to school, I didn't go. If I went to school and I didn't want to listen, I didn't listen. Deep down, I know it was a cry for help. My mother couldn't handle me. If I did just enough, I thought she'd be forced to send me to my father, but that's not what happened. My behavior forced me to see the truth that my mother had been trying so desperately to protect me from. It was 1980. I was 12. Still in the beginning of my 7th grade year, I was on my second suspension. My mother had tried everything, yet I was intent on doing anything and everything other than what was right. She was at her wit's end, so she had my father come over and talk to me. Since their separation, my mother had always left the house prior to my father's arrival. I hadn't noticed that it was such an official thing. She just told me she was leaving so I could spend time with my father. But something unexpected happened that day. My mother couldn't find her keys. I watched her search frantically, throwing things all over the place. "Tonio, you see my keys? Help me find them for your dad to get here." We searched all the usual spots, in the cracks of the couches, on top of the refrigerator, in the junk drawer, all to no avail. I guess the interaction was just inevitable. My mother settled on the fact that she couldn't find her keys. When my father came trotting down the driveway at 6 o'clock, she simply gave up. Now here's the thing. My mother wasn't deeply religious. She wasn't really deep in any way. But one thing she always stressed was her belief in divine timing. My mother believed that things were going to happen when and how they were supposed to. So when she couldn't find her keys that day, I guess she believed that she was supposed to be there when my father arrived. And whatever happened, happened. The second she saw that truck coming down the driveway, she sat down at the kitchen table and lit a cigarette. Something felt weirdly eerie about it all, but I couldn't place my finger on it at the time. My father walked into the house. I could tell that he was immediately surprised. My mother's car was parked in the back, as it always was. I'm pretty sure he was blindsided by her presence. He flashed a half-empty smile as he spoke to her. "Hey, Meredith, what you doing here?" My mother exhaled, expelling her cigarette smoke. "I live here, Cecil." I hadn't seen my parents in the same space in months, and the tension was palpable. My mother stared at my father. It was cold and detached, not at all like the loving look that I was accustomed to seeing when they were together. My father just seemed to be bothered by it as well. I can't put it into words, but something in his expression made me understand that there had been a hurtful exchange between them. Wanting to alleviate the tension, I ran to my father and hugged him. It seemed to work. He broke the gaze that had been reserved for my mother. "Hey, buddy, we gotta talk." My father and I relocated to the living room, and he did what he always did. He started a conversation. It went a little something like this. "Antonio, let me give you a little nugget. When animals feel threatened, they typically do one of two things. They either retreat or they go towards the danger. A decision to go towards the danger is usually rooted in anger. Anger is one of the most complicated emotions because it's about chemistry. Cortisol is the brain chemical that tells an animal that it's in pain or in danger of being in pain, physical or emotional pain. It motivates the brain to do whatever it takes to make that pain or bad feeling go away. And in order to do that, the animal usually has to exercise some aggression. That comes out in the form of anger. That anger has benefits in the wild. Sometimes it's food, mating opportunities, or simple intimidation. But anger is risky for animals in the wild. Two animals in an impulsive fight can lead to severe injury or death, and all because the animal didn't understand that retreating may have been the better option. This is the thing, buddy. I understand that you're angry about the way things have changed, but you can't just go around doing whatever you want because you're angry. There are real-life consequences to being impulsive, and you can't always come back from those things. Sometimes you have to retreat and take the situation for what it is. As usual, my father had a way of wording things. I can't lie. I soaked it up, just like I always did. But something different happened during that lesson. My mother was standing on the threshold that divided the living and the kitchen area. She was smoking what I presumed to be her third cigarette since my father's arrival. Unexpectedly, she broke into laughter. She faced my father and addressed him. "This what you gonna do, Cecil? I'm telling you he's stressing me out, and you can talk about animals?" My father stood. "You the one that asked me to come here, Meredith. Now understand something. I had seen misunderstandings between my parents, but none of them have been extremely contentious. That's why their separation was such a shock to me. So when I noticed that exchange between them, I felt like that was it. My mother wanted my father to be sterner with me, but he was handling it in his way. Case closed. But that wasn't it. My mother was at her breaking point. She was 59 years old and apparently tired of playing the game. She was over me, and she was over my father too. My mother walked over to the couch and sat beside me, and then she dropped a bomb. She looked at my father, then to me, and then she spoke. "I try to leave before your daddy gets here to keep myself from doing this, but I guess the Lord wanted it to happen today." My father tried to intervene. Meredith, don't make this worse than it has to be. My mother simply asked, worse for who? And then she continued. You angry, Tonio? I'm sorry. I'm angry too. I am angry because I met your daddy when I was 17 years old, and I gave my whole life and 3 kids to him. I gave him one of those kids when I was 47 years old, and I nearly tore my body in half doing it. I'm here every day picking up the pieces because your daddy ain't here. You in here running me through the ringer, and I gotta watch you light up like a Christmas tree once a week just because he decides to show up. You mad at me because I won't let you go and live with your daddy? I've been letting you blame me because I didn't want to hurt your feelings by telling you the truth. Well, here's the truth. Your daddy didn't just leave because we weren't getting along. I made him leave after I found out about his other family. You know how your daddy leaves to go on business trips? It turns out that his business is a whole other family. The other woman called me and told me all about it because he's been promising her that he was going to leave me. So I made it easy for him. I sent him to her. You can't go and live with him because he lives with his new woman and their 5-year-old twin girls. That nigga is 62 years old and then started all over. So you angry, Tonio? Me too. Because now I'm 59 years old and my whole life done been a lie. I guess I should start acting out and fighting people too. I looked at my father. Though he didn't speak, I knew it was all true. With tears in his eyes, he said, Meredith, you ain't have to do it like that. Without hesitation, my mother very coldly said, you can't force a cat into a corner, then ask it to scratch you softly. I guess my cortisol kicked in. Just then, Lobo emerged from the kitchen with my mother's car keys in his mouth. They were dripping wet, apparently from having been submerged in his dog bowl. Once again, the legend of Lobo had outsmarted the humans. Or maybe it was just that divine timing that my mother was always talking about. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow Shani Tells a Story on Facebook and Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to purchase books by Shandora Warren, they're all available on Amazon in ebook, paperback, and some in hardback formats. Please like and follow this podcast and share it with your friends, family, and frenemies because all relationships matter, even the toxic ones. Thanks so much for helping me to create the world that I want to see. This is my 10th book. Oh yeah, you're welcome.